Hello everyone and welcome to the latest Lunchtime Bytes webinar from the ICBE Business Excellence Skillnet. Today our presenters are Lorna McDowell and Jerome Doherty Bigara from Xenergie. Lorna is an organization and analysis, international coach and culture transformation consultant. She's the founder of Xenergie, an organization development consultancy network and leadership education provider that helps companies innovate and upgrade their cultural capacity. She brings over 20 years experience in coaching and developing senior leaders and teams from succession planning, turnaround to identifying efficiencies. Prior to this, she worked as a senior manager in the multinational technology sector, responsible for corporate communications and international marketing, and with the Omnicom Group's high-tech marketing consultancy, Brodeur Worldwide. Jerome is a consultant and executive coach with Xenergie. For the past 29 years, Jerome has served hundreds of executives, managers and teams in more than 75 world-class organizations worldwide, from Amex, Amgen, Boston Scientific, Coca-Cola, GE, Marriott, to name just a few. His focus is helping leaders, individuals and teams enhance their effectiveness in the context of strategy execution. Earlier in his career, he worked for General Electric in the UK and the management consulting practice of Arthur Andersen in Mauritius. Today's topic is Agile Teams, developing an Agile mind in a virtually transforming world. In the context of the current crisis, this session will explore and highlight the benefits of developing thinking capacities in your team, powered by Agile Mind, before setting out a pathway to achieve this. The ground rules for today: Lorna and Jerome will present for approximately 20 minutes, finishing up with a 10-minute Q&A. Everyone is muted, but we really do encourage you to submit questions via the chat function, which we will call out at the end of the presentation. If you encounter problems with broadband, please bear with us as we may need to turn off cameras. This session is being recorded. And without further delay, I'll hand you over to the trusted hands of Lorna and Jerome.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Owen. Pleasure to be here. We've been a long time associate with ICBE, so it's lovely to do these webinars. So as Owen said, what we want to kind of focus on today is helping to develop the mindset capacity to think beyond the current crisis. And in fact, I think, you know, our observation of the companies that we've been working with over the last while, even before the crisis, is that teams are getting very caught into gridlocks, and so kind of we're almost in a constant crisis even before the crisis. So the crisis has actually really propelled a need for us to accelerate into a different way of thinking. So in the webinar today, we really want to kind of get underneath what does it mean to have an agile mind, and what, you know, the difference between what we call reductive and expansive thinking. So really to be able to identify the differences there. But also, you know, how do we work with complexity and a number of different paradoxes? How do we work with both the here and now and also prepare for the long term? And indeed, you know, many senior leaders are now saying today that what's important now is that we act with the long term in mind. And we've already started to see what happens when we don't act with that long term in mind. But the big question is, how do we do this? You know, how can we bring people with us, and how? It's all very well knowing what you want to do, but how? So that's really what we want to talk about here today. So to begin with, how do we define this agile mind? And this quote here, I think, sums it up well. It's an accentuated ability to think more deeply and widely on your feet, and hold a high degree of uncertainty and complexity, both short and long-term views, all at once. So there's lots of simultaneous things happening there, and it really calls for a very different way of not just thinking, but being, because to be able to process all of that is a considerable step difference to how many people have been taught to think in a more linear fashion. So I'm going to hand over to Jerome now. Before we do that, we would like to just explore a little bit about how you have been experiencing in your organisation. So we have a poll here, and what we'd like you to reflect on is, over the last 3 months, have you noticed any difference and change in the quality of your own personal thinking? So that's about you. The second question is the same question, but relating to your organisation and your team. So just think, over that COVID experience time, how has your own thinking and being changed, and how is your organisation's thinking and being changed? And we have a third question in there as well, which is about the focus of your conversations. When you think about the here and now in your organisation, where is the focus of your conversations? Is it about navigating the COVID-19 crisis, accelerating through the crisis, starting to think beyond, or already working future scenarios? Just give you a couple of moments just to complete that poll, and maybe Owen, you'll let us know when we've got answers to work with.
Yep, we're up about a third of the people who've completed, so I'll let it run for another 5 seconds and then I'll share the results with you, Lorna. It's quite broad, actually, the spread of thinking. Here, to just give it 3 more seconds. These are complicated questions to ask. Again, I can feel people pondering the answers. I'll stop it now because it'll give you probably the 80-20 ratio. You'll probably have 80% of accurate answers. Just hold on, I'll share the results with you now.
And it is interesting to stop and pause to think about how we actually think. Okay.
Can you see the results there, Lorna?
I can, yeah. So in the first question, quite a broad spread. I know in some of the conversations we've had with our clients recently, you know, that a lot of people are thinking more deeply about the meaning of life and where do they want to be, what do they want to do. So that's good, and both widely and deeply. Yeah. So it's interesting how COVID has really propelled that. Jerome, feel free to comment on these answers as well.
I think what is reassuring is that we are seeing a shift from just navigating the crisis and people starting to think beyond. And I saw there was 53% of the responses already talking about looking at the sort of a 2-year horizon, which is encouraging, indeed.
Indeed, yeah.
Okay, but I'll stop sharing that now so that it doesn't block up your screen.
Yeah. Okay. So some mixed responses there. So I'm going to hand back to Jerome now. Just take us through what we mean by the difference between reductive and expansive mindsets.
Yeah. So I think we continually define our world within the context of what has been. So we'll call this the reductive mindset. And somehow, often what we've seen is that we remain hesitant to truly embrace what might be, which we would qualify as the expansive mindset. Now, I won't go into every single bullet point on the slide, but I think it's worth just in terms of qualifying what we mean by a reductive mindset would be somehow some impatience for action. Using known answers and solutions, so answers and solutions from the past, what we've seen working, preferring solid information, tangible, and often a perception or a mindset that failure is permanent. If we were to compare and contrast this with an expansive mindset, whereby teams would enjoy thinking that goes around with complexity, being comfortable not having the answer. And working with tentative knowledge, and if you think about what's going on right now, we just have partial information or asymmetrical information, depending on where we sit in the organization and where teams sit in the organization. And we've probably heard this a lot, especially in terms of the agile approach of failing fast and seeing failure as a chance to learn and pivot. So it's an interesting contrast between reductive and expansive mindset. I guess it's fair to say that the current crisis is actually shedding light on the limitations of a reductive mindset, which may favor silo thinking in teams and potentially limit the team's ability to see the big picture. What we would argue and what we've seen at Xenergie is that those teams who have ideas and are willing to take a bit of a creative risk to innovate and improve, especially in the context of agility, those who embrace an expansive mindset will probably be the winners and the shakers and movers going forward. So something to take away from this slide is when we talk about agility, it's not having one or the other, but it's the agility between both types of mindsets. It's the ability to draw on factual knowledge from our past, whilst also embracing tentative knowledge of the current context. And there's so many unknown questions out there, and the ability to do that as well. So let's explore further how to do this. So Lorna, let's talk about the learning framework, and then I'll walk you through a potential best practice. So over to Lorna.
So one of the most important aspects, I suppose, of thinking more widely and deeply is also the ability to be able to work at multiple things at the same time. And so the big question organisations are having at the moment is, how do we do this? And one of the first things to say is that it's important to create both time and space in order to do this. And I think that's often the first challenge is, well, when are we ready, or have we got enough time? But thinking about it as a linear, we'll do it when we're ready, that tomorrow never comes. And what's really important now is that we are able to prepare for the future. So there's a couple of important things here about this simultaneous working. The first one, you've got 4 quadrants here. So the first quadrant around personal development, in developing groups and organisations, the group and the organisation can only develop with the mindset change within individuals. So it is both an individual and a group journey, whatever side of the organisation. Moving from a place of certainty to uncertainty and beginning to shift the way that you think is a personal transformational journey. So that's the first thing. So having some form of coaching in place, at least individual coaching, is really, really significant, because I can tell you now, leaders will not make that transition without the support of some form of coaching to help them to get through and understand their own impact in thinking. So there's a lot of personal work to do first. I suppose looking also to the bottom left, it is also a group coaching experience as well. So team coaching is really important. And there's a difference between individual and team coaching. Both support the others. So in group conversations, we can start to look at the interactions of people, but also the interactions of tasks and the relationship between behaviour and task and outcomes. So we start to become far more aware of how one thing impacts another. So that's incredibly important. So the interaction between both the individual journey and the group journey. Now, a lot of people say to us, yeah, but we do team meetings every week or every month. We go off site, or we do stuff on Zoom, whatever. Now, there's a difference between having a facilitated learning journey and one that you do yourself. When you're working transformationally, you have to have some kind of calibration and objective viewpoint around how that is happening, because when you're part of a group, you can't necessarily see the behaviour of the group because you're very subjective about it because you're part of it. So the facilitated space is important. And again, clients have kind of reflected this back at us, that they've seen the difference when they've had facilitation in there and when they haven't. Now, the objective is that over time, one would want to be able to embed and teach these skills to create the space and time for coaching, group coaching within the organisation. So in thinking about that, we also have to think about what are the competences we're trying to develop here. So that brings us up to the top right of this quadrant. And these thinking competences are both connected to leadership, mindset, and they work right across the organisation. So not necessarily thinking about leadership as a position, but also as a mindset. So how do I, as an individual, even if I'm on the line, actually prepare for the future and deal with what's happening in the moment? How do I think beyond my role and how I connect into the bigger picture? How do I contribute to outcomes? Also, how we prepare for future scenarios. So looking 10 years ahead and coming back at today, looking at today from the feet of the future. So these are all some of the competencies that are required to develop at this time. And I would say this is not an option. This is really, really significant. Leaders that don't have these competencies will not be prepared for the future. And there's plenty of evidence that is really backing this up now. Lastly, on the bottom right, we also have to work at thinking through strategy, governance, and business processes around this too. So all of these things have to be coherent. So when we talk about integrated dynamic learning framework, we're starting to look at how all of these different 4 quadrants impact each other and how one impacts another. So the reason for starting with understanding expansive versus reductive thinking or agile mindsets is that unless we've actually done a little bit of work in the top left quadrant, then we start to get stuck in all of the other quadrants. So there is no replacement for the personal journey in this, but we can accelerate it when we run it through a group as well. So I'm going to hand over to Jerome now just to talk us through the next stage of the journey. This is the principle of the framework of the different aspects we have to look at. But Jerome's going to take us now through how that journey might actually work in practice with a team.
Thanks, Lorna. In our experience at Xenergie, working with organizations that have got strategies like lean or agile, what's interesting to observe is that a lot of thought goes into the agile strategy, articulating it, or the lean strategy. There's a lot of thought going into the structure of the organization and the team. So we hear, the squads and the scrums and the agile coaches. We hear of systems as well, but not a lot of thought actually goes into mindsets and skills. And then, no surprise that if we don't spend a lot of time thinking about mindsets and thinking skills, the strategy goes nowhere and derails. So what I'm going to share with you now is potentially from the perspective of an agile coach. And I would assume that quite a few of you on this webinar are actually got the formal or informal role of being an agile coach in a lean or agile transformation. So earlier, and referring to the poll, we mentioned the importance of thinking more deeply and widely, at the same time thinking short-term, long-term. And I think the agile coach here has got a key role to play. So what we are sharing with you now is a potential best practice from the perspective of building those skills, harnessing the power of the teams in terms of its thinking. And in the interest of time, I won't go through every single one of those steps, but just wanted to highlight a couple of interesting ones, just to again illustrate the importance of balancing the short term, long term, the depth of thinking, the width of thinking, and the inside out and the outside in. So look at maybe the first bubble, which is around sense making, and the current state. This is basically the agile coach inviting the team to really connect with themselves, the individual team members and the environment. So thinking in the here and the now. Now, we can compare and contrast this with later in the journey with the whole step of scenario development, where in fact the agile coach will invite the team to really reflect on the paradox of being tempted to do things tactically versus long-term with a strategy, with the complexity of the present, but also the ability to create the future through scenario development and scenario planning. So this is again comparing, contrasting thinking in the short term, but also thinking in the long term. I think worth also highlighting the second bubble there, or step, which is under understanding mindsets and impacts. This is the agile coach inviting the team to really reflect on their limiting beliefs, any gridlocks, anything that false assumptions about the team, but also about the environment, the organization. So this is inviting the team to really think deeper, inside out, in terms of thinking. And let's compare and contrast this with, for example, inviting the team to go on a learning expedition. Now, there's so many organizations out there analogous organizations that are also in the midst of a lean or agile strategy, and what is it that we could learn from them? So a lot of those organizations and teams have got similar business or leadership challenges. So inviting the team's thinking from being inside out to really outside in, thinking really wider and more deeply about some of the challenges of the team. So this is just to give you an example of how we would build that flexibility in mindset, but also in thinking between thinking deeply, thinking widely, thinking the inside out as opposed, and also the outside in, and finally also reflecting short term and long term. And teams that are really effective with their execution are those that are being able to develop that ability. And often it's with the help with a coach, an agile coach. So over to Lorna now to wrap up the session. And then we'll take some questions from you.
Just wanted to kind of add to what Jerome was saying there. I think one of the key benefits of a process like this is that, firstly, it really harvests the value that you have within your organization already. So harvest that untapped potential and stretches it, and encourages the team to find more, not just to do more for less, but to really be inspired and to test and stretch themselves for themselves. So to find a greater sense of purpose. The game-changing question that Jerome showed there is really important, because that really taps into this idea of purpose. How do we connect people more meaningfully to their work and the organisation to the current context as well? So that's actually a really exciting journey and a really exciting time in the team journey. And then I suppose in terms of the output of this, this delivers real value to the business as well, no matter what the kind of organisation it is. And we run these across sector. What it means is that people within the organisation are able to really feel that they are adding value and contributing value, not just by doing what's expected of them, but by going beyond. And that creativity is coming from new places within the organisation. I think very often in the multinational environment, there's a lot of focus on, sometimes doffing the cap to head office, or thinking that we can't offer leadership from different places. And I think COVID has really changed the playing field here, particularly the opportunity to work globally and internationally through Zoom on a level playing field. It may require us to work in different ways, but it's opened up a huge amount of opportunities. And so by really helping to work this agile mindset, it's not just about doing more, faster, quicker. It's really about igniting creativity and bringing leadership from new areas. And I think, in the Irish context, this is really, really important. This is actually opening the door to a very different future. So, we're very excited about, the potential of this kind of learning journey for organisations. And as I say, it's about taking a lot of what you've already got, but harvesting it and making more and getting the value from it and feeling valued. So there are many ways to adapt it as well. So let's just open it to the floor now for questions.
Great, thank you very much, Lorna and Jerome. That's a lot to ponder in 20 minutes. It's a lot of experience played into a very short period of time. And we now have 10 minutes for questions. If people want to put them into chat, and we'll present them to the speakers. But can I kick off by just asking, the reductive versus expansive thinking, which kind of mirrors a lot of what we're hearing about the growth mindset. And the question is, do we need people with both, or do we need people with one? Or does an organization need people who have both mindsets, or should it be an ambition to move gradually everyone from one to the other?
That's a really, really good question. I think it's important to remember that we are in transitionary times. So it's like we're living in parallel universes. And none of us really knows what the future is going to be like. We can have a good guess, but we're all working with this uncertainty. And I think it's around seeing what works. It becomes more obvious about what's generating energy and what's declining energy at the moment. So, my take on the answer is that yes, of course, we need to be able to take care of what works at the moment and to keep business going. But if we only do that at the expense of not looking at the future, then then there's a high degree of risk there. And at the same time, if you only look at the future and dump the past, you may not have learned the lessons. So I think both and is a really good strategy right now, as is really taking the time to learn the lessons. Transformation is a journey, and you can't fast track from one to the other without learning the lessons of the past. And Jerome spoke about failure, and sometimes that's a very emotional place to be, about why things didn't work out, and helping voices to be heard. So the answer to that is, I think will be a transition over time. I think we are moving to a completely different way of being. It will take years for that to fully, that journey to fully unfold. But we are in it now, and we need both now.
Right.
I don't know if Jerome would answer any differently.
Thank you very much. And another question, you've spoken quite a bit about leaders and, especially about the competencies and the skills, and for them to take that journey themselves, which is really important. Is this process, is it, or what works best? Is it top down, or is it bottom up, or is it a combination of both? Does it work more authentically if it comes from the workforce up into senior management, or does it not work if it doesn't have the support at a senior level?
Do you want to answer that, Jerome?
Yeah, I've got a bias here, and I must confess it is a bias, and it's a conscious one, because based on experience, unless it's top down, it's unlikely to really take root in an organization. So back to leadership. So this is about thought leadership, and if the leaders are not embracing that kind of mindset, I think there's very little chance that you can do it from bottom up. That's my experience. So the recommendation here is really just like strategy. You need to have a group of people at the top who are committed to it. When it comes to execution, which Agile is, and embracing that mindset, it's also a requirement that it's from the top as well. The top are role modeling those kind of mindsets. That's my bias.
Yeah, I would maybe add to that and say I think it's also a both and, again, because you want to also build the capacity of people through the organisation. So there's always work to be done on competency building and preparing people for the future. So the more that can be accelerated, the less disconnect one will have. So in that integrated learning framework, when we look at team coaching, we would also be looking at how leaders actually facilitate team coaching and how we breed team coaches in-house as well to work at that. How do you bring people with you? And that's one of the key challenges of our times now, is leading and bringing people with us.
Yeah, there's a related question to that. Is there an executive leadership plan or framework? Which I presume is probably the start of the journey from what you've articulated.
Yes, it's the start of the journey. It's very much the start of the journey. I mean, often how this might begin, is a series of team meetings with the leadership team to understand the nature of the challenge, and I suppose to commit to it as well, which is very much part of the individual journey. Typically, the senior leader might have some individual coaching as well, just to kind of get his or her own thinking aligned. But it's all really built into the design of it. I think the important thing is, whatever you do, make sure it's connected. Don't do stuff in isolation, because I think a lot of good work is lost because coaching happens in isolation, or it's not connected, it's not strategic, and so people that can lead to a degree of frustration because it's not connected. So it's the leader's responsibility to make it strategic and to connect it into the business.
Great. Can I just ask one final question? And if there's any, we have time probably for one more question if people want to put into chat, and it's around the pathway that you've shown, which is really helpful. And it's just from your experience, and is there any particular blockers that people should keep an eye out for, like any points of failure where people get to a certain point and most people fail at this point, or is it all an individual experience? And especially if there's any blockers that people should look out at the beginning.
That's a brilliant question. Yes, I think one of the things to to bear in mind is that transformation feels uncomfortable at the point when you are actually being asked to let go of the past and to transform, because it's like, you know, if you're right-handed, it's suddenly writing with your left hand. It doesn't feel necessarily intuitive, so you might want to lock down rather than open up at that moment, and that's when people give up, and that's the moment at which transformation can happen. So our advice is, then when we work with the client, you know, we always kind of flag this up front before we begin. So this is going to happen. And how we work through this together at that point is crucial to success. And that's why the expansive and reductive thinking as a mindset is really important, because we can get there together, but we have to be able to recognise those moments. Jerome, you want to add to that? I'm sure you've got anecdotes to share.
I just concur. It can be uncomfortable, and you know, you're, as part of the journey itself, is recognizing that that's going to be the case, and being there and holding the space as people, you know, transition and make that transformation.
Great, sorry, I have one last question that came in. So part of the skill set of leadership is the ability to hold seeming paradox, whether between tactical and strategic, reductive and expansive, inside outside perspectives in organizations. I think it's more a comment on what you said, which is quite helpful. Jerome and Lorna, thank you very much for those really valuable insights. The slides and the video from today will be available later on the ICBE website. And to everyone who attended today, thank you very much for taking the time out of your lunch break, although we're all virtually having lunch at home, and look forward to seeing you at the next ICBE Lunchtime Bites.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your lunch.
Goodbye.
Bye.